Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is OrgoKnows, and in today's video we're going to be talking about something a little bit different than usual. In the past we've been talking about microbes and viruses and molecular pathogenic mechanisms, but today we're talking about a little venture that I had not too long ago, about almost a month ago now. So for quite some time I've been wanting to get a personal computer more than just my laptop. Not only for, upgrades to gaming performance, but also for video editing, so that I could process 4K video better, and just be able to use different programs, upgrade my RAM, etc., etc. In late June, I finally got around to doing it and bought all the parts, and so I'm just going to kind of walk through exactly what I put into my PC build and what the capabilities of that are. So we can start with the processor. So the processor I currently have in my PC is the Intel Core 8th generation i7 8700K. So that's an unlocked processor, meaning that the CPU can be overclocked. So the base speed I have on that processor is 3.7 gigahertz, and I believe it can be overclocked to 5.0 gigahertz. I don't currently overclock, but I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult to figure that out if I ever needed it in the future. This processor handles 4K video processing very well. For the video I just published a couple days ago, it was about a 17-minute video in 4K footage at 30 frames per second, and that rendered in about 1 hour, which isn't too bad, at least in my opinion. So moral of the story is that the i7 8700K can handle 4K video processing pretty well. For my GPU, I bought an RTX 2070 card from EVGA, and initially I was a little worried about this card. There were a lot of reports of it arriving DOA, or having artifacts after a few days, etc. But, knock on wood, I haven't had too many issues with this card thus far, and it runs everything very well. It doesn't have SLI support, but take a game like Metro Exodus. It appears to be one of the more GPU intensive games on the market right now, and I can run that game anywhere from 80 to 100 frames with ray tracing technology turned on, as well as all settings turned on ultra. So for a moderate price of $480 compared to, say, the 1080 Ti or 2080 Ti, it's a very good alternative. And just on a brief note, that card does have 8 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. So for the CPU cooler, I was originally going to get an NZXT or Corsair liquid cooling system, but they were a little expensive for the time, and I really didn't think I was going to need any sort of overclocking on either my GPU or my CPU. So I went for a little lower tier CPU cooler, and I went for the Cooler Master Hyper Evo 212. Or I guess Hyper 212 Evo. And although it was a little difficult to set up, I was fearful of snapping my motherboard. It had to use quite a bit of force to get it screwed down, but it runs very, very well, and it keeps my CPU pretty cool even at when my CPU is at 100% performance. And for a price point of around $35 to $40, it's kind of hard to argue, especially with so many glowing reviews from the Cooler Master. So if you're tight on a budget and don't want to do a more expensive fan cooler or liquid cooling system, this is a very good alternative, and I would recommend it. So for my RAM, I have two 16 gigabyte Corsair Vengeance cards. I don't have any RGB or anything like that. Corsair Vengeance is always my go-to for RAM. I know there are so many other great brands out there, but Corsair is just one that I've always stuck with. And the reason I went for 32 gigabytes of RAM versus, say, 16 is that if you use programs such as After Effects or Photoshop, some of those Adobe Premiere, some of those other programs can use quite a bit of RAM at one point, and I was not trying to limit my capabilities if I needed to use a lot of things down the line. Eventually I'd like to become more familiar with After Effects, perhaps get the cloud, and sort of upgrade my editing capabilities. So for the motherboard that I used the MSI Z390, which is the chipset needed for the 8th and 9th gen Intel processors, Z390A Pro, and it was $100 and some, $130. It's not a top tier, but it's not too cheap, and I think it's a good moderate price, and I've had no issues with it. Everything was pretty simple to set in. It fit very well in my case, my case is the NZXT H500, not the H500i. I didn't need the smart device because I wasn't really interested in fan control or RGB control. But yeah, so the MSI and NZXT fit very well, no issues there. So for storage, I'm using the Samsung 870 EVO. It's a 1TB SSD, and it has worked beautifully, and I'm so excited to finally have a solid state drive. For my whole life I've used HDDs, and just the speed difference is still hard for me to become acquainted with, especially on boot up times and restart times under sometimes 10 seconds. So for my power supply, I'm using the EVGA Supernova G3 550 watts. So my graphics card is recommended to have at least, I believe it was 450 watts, but I didn't think it would need that power supply anyways, but I figured for an extra $10 or $20 I may as well get the 550 watts. That way I can upgrade to some more high performing parts in the future if I need it, and not have to worry about blowing out my entire system. So for my mouse, I'm just using a Logitech G203 mouse. It has RGB lighting, and you can kind of modulate that with some software offered by Logitech. And my keyboard is also Logitech. It is the G213 Prodigy. And once again, it has some RGB lighting. It kind of does this wave feature of RGB lighting shifts, which is very cool. And they were both fairly cheap, and I would personally highly recommend them, especially Logitech as a brand. I see some keyboards out there for $150, $130. That is, I don't understand why anyone would use that or pay for that, especially considering this keyboard, which works wonderfully for gaming or any other personal needs, was only $20-some. So a total price point of my PC was about $1450 for the parts. Beyond the parts, I actually had to buy the keyboard and the mouse and the monitor and a speaker system, but that came out to be a little under $300. So total price is about $1,800. That's quite the investment, and it's taken me quite a few years to have those funds to actually purchase this PC. But the goal of this build was to make it essentially future-proof for 4 to 5 years, and so I wouldn't even have to think about upgrading any parts or anything wearing down on me. I just didn't want to deal with that every year. So it's think of it as an investment, right? So, and I can actually show you guys the build real quick here. So here's the build. Like I said, there's no RGB lighting, but if we come in here, you can see the cooler master. There's a top fan, the back fan, as well as a Wi-Fi adapter that comes with the H500 case. And down below the CPU cooler is my RTX 2070, and the power supplies right there. And there you can see my RAM in the back and my motherboard barely. It's nothing too fancy, but it works super well, and I'm very happy with the purchases. I figured I'd make this video for anyone who wants to try to build their own PC in the future. Hopefully this has some good starting points on things to look into, some parts that have really great performance for not too crazy of a price. I definitely don't think you need things like an i9 9900K or any of those crazy parts. I mean, if you want that and you need that for some more extreme examples or extreme processing, then go for it, right? But for a starter build, I think this was more than enough, and I'm very pleased. And that's all for the video. It's probably going to be a shorter video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all in the next one. Farewell.